So, today we will install a couple of scripts and a couple of tools that have installers. The scripts we have to copy manually into the correct place. For Windows and Mac, the places are fairly similar. Also, the installers are fairly similar, but just to make sure that no one gets lost, I will start with the installation of the tools for Windows. Then we will install the same tools for Mac, and then we do the same thing again. We copy all the correct files for Windows, and then we copy all the correct files for Mac. So I start with the Windows people. In the folder that you've gotten today, you will find a couple of things. First, we have a folder that is called Helpful Scripts. These are the scripts that we will install as the second step together. Then we have a folder that is called Plugins. In here are two plugins. One is called the FX Console, and the other one is called Duik Basel, or I don't know how to pronounce that. These two we just want to extract. So the Mac people could do that as well already, extract their tools. I only did for one. Oh, that's the same one. FX Console, Duik Basel. Then let's start with the Duik Basel installation. In there, we can see these are just, oh, they don't have the installer anymore. Okay, then we just copy it manually, that's fine. So when we open it up for the Windows people, we can see that we have a couple of files here, a JSX file and some folders. A JSX file is always an indication that this is a script that can be run via After Effects. There are two types of scripts, or two ways that scripts can be built. In both ways, they are called .jsx in the end. So when you get a script from someone or from a website, always double check where it should be installed, because it can either be a script that opens up as a window, or it can be a script that opens up as a panel. So they are written differently, but they're all called the same way. So that makes things a little bit complicated. Duik is supposed to be a panel, so it needs to be put into the following folder. Let's copy all the files in here and open up a new window. In the new window, we go to this PC, then your C drive, Program Files, Adobe, After Effects, Support Files. Then we look for the Scripts folder a little bit further down. And then most scripts can be installed directly in here. However, Duik needs to be placed into the Script UI panels. And then you just paste all the things that you just copied directly into this folder. Yeah. You might need admin rights for this. All right. So after we're done with this, you can keep this panel open. We will need it later. Then you go back to the plugins, to the FX Console installer. And this one does have an installer. So this one we run. In here, it's quite simple. Just always click on Next. Here, it usually detects automatically what the current version of After Effects is. It does not show the CC version. It shows the actual version of After Effects. So this is version 16. Then we click Next. It will just confirm these are the folders where it will put all the tools in, and then it will already be finished. So this one is fairly simple. Then we just click Finish. All right. Next, the Mac people. 1 second. Next, let's do the same steps for Mac. So for the Mac people, we want to let me make this full screen so it's a little bit nicer. There we go. For the Mac people, we will go into the plugins folder first, and we unzip the two files that we have in here. Let's start with the simpler one, which is the FX Console. For the FX Console, just double-click on the DMG to open up the installer. Then we just have one file in the folder that opened up, so we double click to open it up to launch the installer. We click on next, we double check that our version of After Effects is selected, so version 16. We click on next and next. Might need to put in your computer password, and then it should be done. We can close the FX Console installer window. One second, why are you not pausing? Next. After we installed that, we want to go into the Duik Basel folder and select all the files that we find in there. Then we want to open up another Finder window. You can hit Command N to open up a new window. There, you want to go to the Application folder, look for the Adobe After Effects folder. Then you go into the Scripts folder, and because it's a panel, we go into the Script UI Panels folder. And in here, we want to paste all the files from the Duik Basel folder. So all these ones here, copy and paste. Do we need an admin again? Yes, we do. So far, so good? Next, I will just continue with the Mac people because we already have this stuff open. Then I will go back to the rest of the settings for the Windows people. Keep the Script UI Panels window open. In the folder with the files that you've gotten today, you want to go back to the Helpful Scripts folder. There, you will find a folder that is called Scripts and one that is called Script UI Panels. You want to select everything that is inside of this folder. So all the JSX files, copy them, and then paste them in the same Script UI Panel folder where we copied the Duik Basel into. So now, this folder should be a little bit fuller than before. Then, in the Scripts folder, we have a couple of other JSX files. You want to select them, except for the Script UI Panels folder, of course. And these files, you copy and paste not into the Script Panels, but into the regular Scripts folder. So make sure the Scripts folder is highlighted, and then paste the files in there. So you select all the files in the Scripts folder, except for the Script UI Panels folder. Then you go back to the After Effects installation folder, make sure that the Scripts folder is selected, and then you paste.
Only in the Scripts folder?
Yeah? That's it for the Mac people. For the Windows people, we now want to do a similar thing. So we will go back to the folder that you've gotten today, into the Helpful Scripts folder. Then you go to the Scripts folder and into the Script UI Panels. You take all the JSX files that are in the Script UI Panels folder, copy them. Then you go back to the other folder that you still have open, so the Script UI Panels folder in the installation folder from After Effects. And you paste these files in there. Then you will go one folder backwards into the scripts folder. You do the same thing in the folder of the files that you've gotten today. Select the JavaScript files or the JSX files and paste them directly in here. Oh, I think I didn't use the right shortcut. Copy, oops. Copy and paste.
Again, in the scripts UI?
Nope, this time just in the scripts folder. Alrighty. So let me briefly show you what we have installed. The first thing that we installed, or one of the first things that we installed, is the FX console. The FX console is something that will make our life in After Effects a whole lot easier. If you had After Effects open, please close it and open it back up so that it can find all the tools that we have installed. So every time you install something to After Effects, you need to close it and open it up, or just don't have it opened while you install it. Only on opening up, After Effects will search for all the things that could be installed and will load them. And there's no way of loading it otherwise. The FX console is created to make the workflow of applying effects a whole lot easier. We will not need to use the effects and presets panel here anymore. Instead, we will be able to use a shortcut. Another additional nice thing about the FX console is that it can also create screenshots, save them in a nice library inside of the effect or the plugin, and we can also very easily export screenshots from After Effects without having to actually render.
My After Effects says no emotion script connected with that.
So, the FX console can be configured by going to Window and then looking in the list down here for the FX console. So you might need to scroll down a little bit further until you find the FX console JSX. Let's do this together. So you go to Window and then you choose the FX console. It should then open up as its own panel like this. Then we want to go to the settings of this. In the settings, we want to give it a specific shortcut. And I've set it up for my machines to be Control-Tab. I think the default is something else. Yeah. Control-Space does not work well, because the spacebar is already reserved for so many other things, so Control-Space does not work well. I found that Control-Tab, for all the shortcuts that are available here, works the best. So I recommend using Control-Tab, and then you just hit OK. Then you can close it, and After Effects will remember the setting. Just to show you real quick what this does, let's create a new composition, and let's create a solid. And I will make the solid a little bit smaller. If I now need to apply an effect, instead of going in here and looking, for instance, for a fast blur, I can just select the layer, hit Control-Tab, and then just like the console in Cinema 4D, it opens up, I can type in fast blur, and it will already give me the different options. If I hit Enter, the element that is highlighted in blue will be applied. I can use the up and down arrow keys to switch between different elements. So when I now hit Enter, my effect will be applied automatically. So this, later on, when you know more effects and you apply more effects, will save you a whole lot of time, because you don't always have to go to the panel, look for the effect, moving it over. You can just be there where your mouse is, hit Control-Tab, look for the fast blur, hit Enter, apply, and you're done. So right now it doesn't feel like much of a time saver, but when you use it for a while and then you can't use it suddenly, you feel like you're back in the Stone Ages. Another nice thing about the FX console is that when I hit Control-Tab, I can create a screenshot of what I see right now. So I can take a screenshot and I can then find it in the library here. And then I can see screenshots of all sorts of things that I've done in the past, as well as this element that I've created here. And from here, I can either copy it to the clipboard or export it as a JPEG or PNG. So this is very, very convenient to compare multiple files or to export something. One note, it will only create a screenshot based on the resolution that we currently see in here. So down here, my resolution is half, so it will only create a screenshot at half the resolution. If you want to learn a little bit more about the FX console, it can do a couple of things more. Then you can just Google for it, and you can find who built it. And it is a company called Video Copilot. So if you just look for FX console, it should be the very first thing that you find up here. So Video Copilot is a very popular company that builds lots of tools for After Effects. This is one of the freeware things, and in here is a little bit explained what the FX console does and what sort of things have been improved over the past. So just watch the videos when you have time, learn a little bit more, but we will stick to the basics of just looking for effects and creating screenshots. The other tool that we have installed is called Duik. Also there, oops, if you would write it correctly, you can just look for Duik, and usually the first thing that you find is the correct one. The company that is distributing it by now is called Rainbox for whatever reason. Duik is one of the most popular open source plugins or scripts that help animators. The main thing, however, that we will use it for is to create rigs. So a rig is, for instance, something when you have an arm and you need to create connections between different joints. So what we can do is we can create sort of bones, and we can define these are certain elements, and we could move just the hand, and the arm will bend automatically based on how we move the hand. This is something that we will use a little bit later into the quarter, not today. Duik can be found by going to Window and then looking for Duik. There. The Basel in the end has been added a year ago or something because one of the main developers died, and that's his name. So that's why by now it's called Duik Basel as a contribution. It might say that there is a newer version available because for some reason sometimes they're not that well programmed. Like here it says current version and new version. Not quite sure where the difference is. Anyways, so you can always do updates or you can just ignore it for now. If you get a pop-up, does someone get, when they open it up, does someone get a pop-up with an error message?
It wasn't an error message, but help.
Oh no, help is fine. The help I got as well, but you didn't get an error message. If you get an error message, there might be the message that says that the script cannot be launched because a certain preference needs to be changed. This is a preference that we changed 2 classes ago. Let me just show you again. If this pop-up happens that says scripts need to allow to access something, then you would go to Edit and Preferences. For Mac, of course, it's After Effects and then Preferences in the top. In older versions of After Effects, you will find the setting in the list here. It's called Allow Scripts to Write and Access Network Files or something like this. So in older versions of After Effects, this setting is in here. In the newer versions, we will find it underneath Scripting and Expression, and it's here. Allow scripts to write files and access network. Well, I was close enough.
I think I know how to do it myself. Something's missing, I think, in my scripts.
Let me check. Alrighty. So, just to show you a very, very, very brief example of one of the things that can be done with Duik. For instance, I could say that I have an arm. Let me just make a really, really pretty one. So I would have something like this. I have the shoulder, then I have the elbow, and then I have the hand. This is my pretty arm. I could say that I pre-comp this. Then I can add pins. Have you ever worked with a puppet pin in Photoshop? So the puppet pin or the puppet pin tool also exists in Photoshop as well. Essentially, you just create points like this, and then you can move them around and therefore bend an element. Damn. So for Photoshop, the same thing exists. However, I think by now the options in After Effects are a little bit more professional. Anyways, what I can do is I can select all of the bones that I've created, just me doing, we do it some other time together, and I can add bones. What this then does is it creates these pins that I can easily access, because normally if I want to move certain things around, I have to have the layer selected, be in the puppet pin tool, click on the pin, and then I can move it around. But now I have them as separate layers, so I can a lot easier move them around. Also, I can now animate them a lot easier, and I can create relationships between them. So I could, for instance, parent them together. So this here would be my root, where rotate everything around, or this one here, where rotate just the elbow around. There are a couple of other settings to make this look a little bit more natural. I will not go into it right now. Then, I don't do it that often in my work, so I often forget what the correct order is, but let's see if I can remember it. If we go to, oh, I think they are a lot smarter by now. I can select them together. Maybe they need to be parented already the correct way. Then I select them, and I will say auto rig I key. Yes, I think it worked. And now it created a relationship between the different elements that it had selected. And now I have the arm that I can move, and the rest is then rotating and moving around automatically. Yay! So that's kind of cool. Later on, we will have some other examples, some that look a little bit prettier than this one, but it's super awesome that we can create these sort of things. And because of this, this is where the name of the tool comes from, because what we are creating here is in so-called I-key chain. People usually call it I-key, even though it's sort of like IK, and it stands for inverse kinematic. And that is just describing that something is moving in a certain way. I'm not a mathematician or a geometrist or something. Anyway, so I-key chains is what this is called, and that's why doing is called I-key. Anyways, so now that we have everything set up, how did a folder create that is German? However that happened. That's really interesting. Does it happen again? What? How? I've never seen that. Anyways. So, the first half of the session was super boring, and I'm afraid it will probably stay this boring. I want to show you the things that we can do with Photoshop and Illustrator files, how we can import them. So we already know that we can import images. There it's quite simple, we just drag and drop and then we're happy. For vector-based files or for Photoshop files, we have some additional options. I will start with the Photoshop file first, and then we go from there. For a Photoshop file, I thought it might be nice if we have something partially practical, and that is a browser mockup. So let me open this up in Photoshop and take a look at what we have. Here on Windows, it will give you an error because this is a Mac mockup using the default Mac font, which is this San Francisco Pro Display blah thing. But I don't have the font, but I don't care. So in here, I can see that I have a Photoshop file with layers that I can access. For instance, I can move elements around. I can go into here and write my own text up here, save it, and then I'm done. I could take this Photoshop file and import it directly into After Effects. And then I would get a whole bunch of options. Let me just do it and see what happens. Just me, import the Photoshop file, and I will see that I will get a pop-up. This pop-up asks me how I want to import this file. And I have essentially three options. I can import it as footage, as composition, or as composition retain layer sizes. Let's explore the three. Option number 1. I hit OK. I get, well, one Photoshop file. I can create a new composition, import this, and I can see this is just one file. But earlier I said that with Photoshop files we are able to access layers of a Photoshop file. So apparently, if we import it as footage, it's just one layer. So far, so good. Let's try the other option. I again drag this in, and I will choose composition. I also have the additional option down here to choose editable layer styles or merge layer styles into footage. If you're using just regular simple layer styles, like one shadow or one gradient, something overlay, then you can enable this. If, however, you use these newer functionalities where you can add multiple drop shadows, then After Effects doesn't understand it because this module has not been updated in 5 years or so. So newer layer styles are not supported in here, and you want to be careful with that. So normally I will just say merge layer styles into footage. When I hit OK, I can see it looks a whole lot different. I get a folder and I get a composition named after my Photoshop file. If I open up this folder, I can see that I have all sorts of files and compositions in here. So essentially, it will take every single layer and it will create its own element. So for instance, we have new tab button. So when I open this up, I can see that I have, oops, come on, the new tab button here as its own file. So every single layer in Photoshop will be a separate entry that gets imported. Then every folder that I have will be a pre-comp. So when I open up this composition, I can see how I see all the same things that I've seen before, with the difference that I can go to my separate layers and I can now turn them on or off. So far, so good. One thing, however, is a little bit weird, because normally when I select a layer, I see the boundaries of the layer. Here I don't do that. Let me zoom out a little bit. I have the fav icon selected, and when I move it around, I can see how apparently it's a super large layer, even though it's just this tiny icon here. And that was because of the way that we imported it. Let's try it a third time. If I now, oops, if I import it this time again, and I choose the third option, composition retain layer sizes, I will notice that the boundaries are in fact correct. So when I look for a layer here, I can select it and I can see how the boundary appears to be the correct one. So let me zoom in a little bit. Cheap. Zoom in or not. Come on. Why are you doing this to me? Just zoom into the corner. Why are you constantly, am I stupid? I will get there, sooner or later. Here we go. I'm there. Ta-da. Man. So we can see that we now have the boundaries in the correct place. And that is because of the third option. So, importing as footage imports everything merged. Importing as composition gives us all the separate layers, but each layer will have the size of the composition. Importing as composition while retaining the layer size imports it, in most cases, exactly the way that we want to.
In which case would you choose the second one?
The second one is necessary in many different scenarios. For us, usually not that practical. But, for instance, if we have multiple objects and we want them all to have a shared anchor point, then this option would make sense. In Illustrator, we have the same thing. Let me see if I can or can I also do that in Photoshop? Let me see if I can, in Photoshop, really quickly replicate an example where it might make sense. So, let me go to Photoshop, and let's say I have a new document here. And I have a couple of icons. Let's pretend these dots here are icons. So one icon here, one icon there, and there, and there, and there. Doesn't matter. So I have these elements here, and I want them to come out of the center, or I want them to revolve around the center. If I import it with all of their anchor points in the center of the element, I would have to move each layer around, and I have to animate it in the position and the scale to come out of the center. But if I import them with all the same anchor points, let's just try it. So here, let's keep it untitled. I can animate it a lot easier. So, in desktop, import, composition, then I could, for instance, say everything should animate in the scale. I go 20 frames forward, activate the stopwatch, go to the beginning of the timeline, and I change this to 0. And if I now animate this, I can see how everything is coming out of the same center. So here I can only animate the scale, and it does what I want to. And then, of course, I can ease everything. Let me see if I can. For some reason, the F9 now doesn't work anymore. It worked last time. Command Shift K, and then 88 and 22. And then I offset everything a little bit. And then I create an animation like this. Fairly simple, because the anchor points of my layers were all in the center. So in scenarios like this, it makes sense. It also makes sense for another reason. When we understand how this import works. So what After Effects essentially does is, it takes a layer, it saves it internally as its own asset, crops it to the size that it has. It will be imported as... Can someone close the door? Thank you. It will be imported as its own entity, and then it will be placed into the composition. Now, the only thing that After Effects can update is the content of the layer. So, for instance, if I go back to my Photoshop file, I can select this layer, favicon, and I can change, for instance, this is a smart object, really? Okay. And I can change the color. I can make it red. I can save the smart object, and I can save the file over here. When I then go back to After Effects, I will see how it will update and refresh. But already I can see something else has happened. So the color has changed here. For the fav icon, everything is fine. My text layer, on the other hand, does not look like this anymore. The reason is the text layer has changed in size, But After Effects doesn't replace the placement. It only replaces the content of the layer. So the layer in After Effects is being told to be placed here with its center. But if the content of the layer becomes larger, the position does not change, just the content gets larger. So if I go back here and I just undo a couple of steps, I save this, go back to After Effects, I will notice how it is back to where it was, but the anchor point didn't change. And this is another reason why the other option might make sense. So here, because we are importing it with the correct layer sizes, it is placed in here and placements are not updated. So when I move this around, I save this, I go back, After Effects is updating stuff, but nothing is happening because I did not change the content of this, just the placement. And the placement is not live updated. The main reason is I'm able to move this around myself with After Effects. And because I can move this around here, After Effects would have no reason of knowing what is the current thing, where should it be placed. So, in that case, if I want to move things around or update sizes of contents in Photoshop and have them updated in After Effects, we would also use the other option. Kind of makes sense? Alrighty. Let's take a look at the other things that it has imported here. So we can see we have our fav icon and we have this text layer here. One magic about this is I can convert a text layer into an actual text layer in After Effects. So if I in After Effects want to change this, I can just right-click on the layer and I can say that I want to create, and then I choose Convert to Editable Text. Then I can see how it converts it into editable text. Because of Windows, I will get the hint that the font is changing, but now it literally converted it to a text layer, and I can create my own text in here. This is then also completely independent from the Photoshop file. So no matter what I do in After Effects, I would never touch the Photoshop file, no matter how many things I change here or what I change. Alrighty, so now I know I can change texts here, which is super convenient. Then I have certain compositions. For instance, I have a mask. Not quite sure what that composition does. Let's take a look. I have a mask. I could single view this to see, apparently the mask is sort of the inside of the website that will be shown in there later on. A composition is always the same size as the composition itself, or pre-comp is always the same size as the composition. So when I go inside of here, I can see that this apparently contains two things. Add website here, well, that is super useful, and another mask. So far, so good. Then we have additional compositions down here. One is called lines, the other URL bar. These ones look a little bit different because they do not have a blending mode. They also don't have this option here enabled. The reason is they're assholes. We might remember when we have a text layer, for instance, it has the sun icon enabled, so we can scale it larger, it stays nice and sharp. This is what the sun icon does for vector-based layers like text or shape layers. For composition, however, it does something completely different. If I go into the options here, we can see for comp layers, it says collapse transformations. This does not help me at all understand what this does. But let me show you. Let's pretend I have let me show you another example. Let's go to, do I still have something from Unsplash? Pack. Nope. Okay. Let's pretend I have something. Just the first thing that I find. This is good enough. Chip. 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 And I want this to be in here. So I have something in my background, and Let's say I start to design a pop-up. I would start by creating maybe some text. Then I realize I can't really see the text, so I need some sort of boundary. If I want to blur the background, in After Effects we can do something really smart. We can just create an adjustment layer. Adjustment layers in After Effects are like adjustment layers in Photoshop, with the difference that they are not specific to one effect. So I can just create an adjustment layer by going to Layer, then I go to New and Adjustment Layer, and in here I can now apply effects, like the fast blur. I will increase it, and I can see how I blur everything. Now the magic is, I can resize this layer and therefore sort of create a mask. I could place it behind my text, and maybe I add some curves and make it overall a little bit brighter, something like this. So let's say I've built this and I'm happy with this, but it contains multiple layers, so I convert it into a composition. So whenever we have multiple things and things get messy, we merge them together or group them together in a pre-comp. So I would call this one pop-up. And suddenly this happens. The adjustment layer has disappeared. The reason is that an adjustment layer does not go through a composition. So a composition only, where's my composition? A composition only shows us the actual pixel contents, but it does not modify anything underneath it. An adjustment layer, on the other hand, modifies things that are underneath it. If I enable the sun icon, then this works again. So the sun icon makes it so that the composition itself doesn't really exist, and it lets everything pass through. Pass through is, by the way, also the word that Photoshop uses for the same functionality. Do you know of the blending mode that is called pass through? This one. Yeah? Okay. So I don't need to explain what the difference is if we have something set to pass through or normal, for instance. You are so motivated today. I'm also not so fun today. Such a waste. Okay. I will just briefly go through what pass-through means for the people that don't know. If we have, let's take the same image again. So if we have an image and, oops, no, don't want this. If we have an image and we do, for instance, I take one part of the image and I move it to a different place, up here. And then I want to do some color changes. I have different options. I could, for instance, create an adjustment layer. I can go to my curves and I can say that I want to make this brighter. And when I want to apply it to just this layer, I alt-click between the layers to create a clipping mask. Now, this will only be applied to the content of the layer. Another option would be to group these together. When I group them together, the group is set to pass through. So right now, it behaves exactly like it did before, which means the curve is applied to everything, even outside of the group, because the group is set to pass through. If I, however, set this group to normal, my adjustment layer is only applied to the content of it. So things like adjustment layers or blending modes are not being passed through. That means if I, for instance, take, a solid color, well, let's stick to the red, and I set this now to multiply, it is multiplying on top of my normal image, but because the multiply is not being passed through, the rest of the group will just be the regular layer. So this is what pass-through does, and in Photoshop, in After Effects, it works pretty much the same thing. So if I want something to go through a composition, then it needs to be set to pass through in Photoshop, and in After Effects, the sun icon needs to be enabled so that adjustments or blending modes are being carried through the composition. Alrighty. I'm already bored by myself. Yes?
So is that if you export a Photoshop file
Mm-hmm.
to After Effects, is that if there are elements in Photoshop, they have the sun icon, but does it convert these elements to vectors from Photoshop?
Nope.
Then
Everything that we get from Photoshop, even if it is, well, some shape layers that we create in Photoshop are then converted to shape layers in After Effects, or at least we have masks for them. If After Effects does not support the things that you have applied to the layers in Photoshop, it will be converted to pixels. If we have texts, we can convert them to text. If we have smart objects, they don't remain smart, because After Effects also doesn't support them, unfortunately. So a smart object will also just be a regular merged down pixel version of what we see right now at that scale level.
so only property shapes will be vectorized.
Yes, I think we do have a shape. We do have a shape. The element that we have here in the fav icon is actually a shape layer, I think. Let's double check. Oh no, it's a smart object, so it's not. The mask here could be, what about lines? Oh, here, lines. What are these lines? They're locked. Where are they? I don't see them. Lines. Show me. Oh, it's this line here. Ugh. We can hardly see that one. Okay, let's see. Yeah. These lines down here, I guess they are. So when I go in here, and here are some shadowy lines. And these ones, as we can see, are masks that we then get. So some things that are in Photoshop shapes will then also be masks that we can edit in Photoshop. But it's not as compatible, so we can see here, even though I make it larger, I can see I apparently don't see more of it. So I can only use it usually to make things smaller. Oh right, not even that. Well, at least I have the mask here.
What do you mean by mask? Is it the same thing that we created in the last class when we were using text? Or was that a separate thing?
That is a separate thing. So what we were using in the last class is referred to as a matte, which was just an additional layer that is used as a matte layer. Then in After Effects we have masks and shape layers. A mask, for instance, is if I have a new composition and I take the image in here and I want to mask out a specific area, then I will go to the pen tool and I can just create a mask like this. So I draw onto the layer and then it masks it out. In After Effects, we don't have the option to use a brush to create a custom mask. We can do that, but it's a little bit more complex. So in After Effects, the default is creating shape-based masks. The other option is if I have nothing selected, I can just click and do the same thing, but then I get an additional layer. So on this additional layer, this is called a shape layer, and on a shape layer we have options like fill and stroke, and they are independent from other layers here. So if the combination between, or the integration of After Effects and Photoshop were a little bit better, we should get a shape layer out of it, but unfortunately it hasn't been updated in a very, very long time, so unfortunately that's not going to happen anymore. We do get layers with masks on it. Sometimes it helps, but most of the time it doesn't help so much. This is one of the reasons why we always want to reduce the Photoshop file as much as possible, because they are not as compatible anymore like they were 5 years ago. Many things are not supported, so sometimes when you open it up in After Effects it might look slightly different than in the Photoshop file, Plus, many things we can't access anyways, so there's no reason to import it and get confused. So if, for instance, I know that I'm not going to touch anything here except for maybe the URL, because I want the URL to be animated so it types itself in, then I would find the URL, which is this layer here, then I take everything else and I will just merge it together. So this is merged, because I don't need those layers. The only thing I care about is everything in the background and then the URL that I want to type in. This year will then be a lot easier in After Effects to handle because we have less clutter. It will be a lot faster because After Effects doesn't have to read 50 layers from the Photoshop file, just 2, and overall less errors that can happen. So when we work with something like this, we want to reduce it. All right, let's actually do something that could be sort of interesting and fun. I will stick to this example here, and I will merge it, or I will crop it to a size that makes sense. When I hit Command-Alt-I, when you hit Command-Alt-I, or you go to Image Size, then we can see that it already has the correct width, but not the correct height. So this is, I think, I don't know, 4:3, or I have no idea. A different format anyways, and we want it to be our 1920 by 1080. So I would go here to my pixels and switch this unconstrained to, oh, sorry, not the image size, that is stupid. Obviously, I want the canvas size. So here I change it to pixels and then to 1080. Why do I change the canvas size and not the image size? That is a very stupid question. I still would like to hear the answer.
Whole thing should be just a picture of it.
Because our comp size is 1920.
Well, I know why we are changing it to 1920 to 1080, so it fits to our composition. But why am I using the canvas size instead of the image size?
Instead of like cropping it without cropping the edges, it's like you making the artboard smaller, without
Mhm.
yeah, all the
I think you are saying the correct thing. So the canvas size is just taking away parts of my canvas. It crops something. Whereas the image size is stretching my image. So if I would have done this in the image size, I unconstrain the proportions, and I will do it here, 1080. Then suddenly everything looks super stretched. So obviously that's not what I want to do. So image, canvas size. Now another nice thing that I have here is I can tell it from where it should crop. So I could say it should crop from the top. So the top is stuck and then it crops all the way around it, the bottom. When I now hit OK, yes, some cropping will happen. And now I have a composition that has the correct size, nothing is stretched, everything is fine. I have the 2 layers that I want to work with. Then I can save this maybe as a prepared file. Here, just like I do for Illustrator files when I import them to Cinema 4D, I would just give it an _prep so I know this is the merged down file. I save it and then I import it. Maybe later on I will also save the mask. Remind me of that, maybe. So when I then import it, I will import it with the layer sizes. Where do I have it? On my desktop. And I think I was in the Mac folder. No, I wasn't. I was in the Windows folder. There I was. I can then say, I want to import it as composition retain the layer sizes, open this composition up, and I could animate this URL being typed in. To do so, I right-click on the layer, go to Create, Convert to Editable Text, Font Changes, probably not for the Mac users. Then, to animate the text, we already know this. This is easy peasy. We open up the options, go to the play button, then I will say that I want to animate the opacity, change the opacity to 0, go to the range selector, to the advanced options, making sure that the smoothness is set to 0, and then I just animate the start. I activate the stopwatch, I hit U, so it only shows me this property here. Then I can go to 30 frames forward, and I will change this to 100. So now I have the URL that is typing in here. So this is already a good start for an animation. Afterwards, I want a website to load in. For this website, maybe I just take the large image that I downloaded earlier, which I have in here. Then I want this to appear. Maybe I want to fit it to the width of my composition, so I can right-click on it, go to Transform, then I will go to Fit to Comp Width, and now this has the correct width. Then let me just put it roughly to the correct position up here. Does it snap? It snaps. Awesome. That's great. So this should appear after the URL has been typed in. So I play this back, then I give it a little bit of space, then I move the endpoint of this to the endpoint of my layer. So when I play it back, the URL types in, and then the website is loaded. Maybe I then want to add a fancy way of showing off this website. So right now this is happening sort of full screen. Next, I might want to zoom out. In order to zoom out, I don't want to do this inside of this composition. I want to do it inside of a main composition. So here, let's say I have my comp1, where I do all of my main things in it. And then I take the Chrome mockup composition and I just drop it in here. So here, all this animation happens, the image appears, but I can just, if I want to, scale it down, for instance. So here, I could say, maybe I want an animation where it scales down and moves backwards a little bit. I let the URL type in, the image appears, and then it moves backwards. I hit P for the position, Shift S to also show the scale, activate the stopwatches, and then I go 20 frames forward. Now at this point, let me change the scale here, and let me move it up a little bit. Maybe let's go to 50%. And then I move it up a little bit. This is the animation. If I now want to ease this, I have to do it per property. You might remember, we have to select all of them, convert them to an easy ease, close, doesn't matter, and then per property selected, Command-Shift-K, and then the other property. Let me now show you what a lot of an easier way there is. We will repeat these steps in a moment together. I will go to Window, and I will use a tool that is called any.green. By the way, all the scripts that you've installed today that start with an any are scripts that I have programmed myself. The any.green gives us the option to change the keyframe velocity for as many properties at the same time as we want to. So here, I don't have to convert it into easy ease first. I just select them, and then I say I want an easing of, for instance, 66 and 44. Then I hit apply, and instantly it is eased already with the settings that I want. So no weird shortcuts, not doing it per property, all in one place. When I now play this back, I have my main thing, and then it moves back quite nicely. If I'm feeling really fancy, I could even rotate this in 3D space a little bit. In After Effects, we have something that is called 2.5D, which is sort of a fake 3D space. We have actual 3D space, but objects are not 3D. They are always flat. But if I enable this, I get additional options. I can see how my position and scale have added a third property for the Z-axis, and for my rotation, I have added an X and a Y rotation. So here, for instance, I could go to my Y rotation and rotate it, and then I rotate it in 3D space. I could then animate this property as well. So I activate the stopwatch here, go to the beginning, and I change the rotation back to 0. And I just give these keyframes the same easing as I did before. Then, if I want to, I could also add a little bit of a reflection towards the bottom to make it look a little bit interesting when it scrolls. So I could duplicate the layer, get rid of all the animations that I have, and I parent it. Then it rotates for whatever reason, so I shift parent it. It still rotates. Today was not a good day. So if it rotates, which it shouldn't, we can just take all of our rotations and reset them. And also reset the scale, apparently. Anyways, we can then go into the scale and change the second value, which is the Y position. Then we can enable snapping, move it down, and let it snap down here. Change the opacity of the reflective layer a little bit, and then we have a nice 3D layer with the reflection in the bottom. And if we then start animating the position of the website content like this, maybe here we give it a little bit of a snappier easing, like 88 and 22. Then we get a nice effect like this. Ta-da! Let's try to do this together. We start in Photoshop. There we go. And let's start with the original file. So let me close out these things. And let me open up the regular file again. So the first thing that we want to change is changing or merging down everything that we don't need. So for instance, let me fix the icon here real quick, somewhere like here. We want to keep our URL, so we move it to the top. Something is really wrong today. Then another thing that we might want, because we want to add a scroll later on, we want to know where the website is supposed to sit. And this is what this layer down here does. So maybe we take the mask and the add website here, we merge them together. The shortcut is Command E, and then we move it to the top as well. Now everything else can be merged. So from the fav icon all the way down to the background. We select it and we hit again Command E to merge. So we are left with 3 layers. Everything in the background, the layer that represents the mask for where the actual website sits, and the URL. I'm not even touching it. And the URL in the top. Alrighty? Mm-hmm. So, let me just pause the recording so this doesn't have to be in there a second time. Now, this file we want to save, but as a new version. Command-Shift-S.
Do we change the canvas size also?
Oh yeah, right. Sorry, if so many things are just constantly not working out the way that I want to. We change the canvas size, of course, so we go to Image and we choose Canvas Size. In here, we change it from inches to pixels, and we change the height to 1080. We want to make sure that the top stays untouched, so we click on this icon here. Then we hit OK. It will say, yes, some clipping will occur. And then we should have a nice prepared file like this. This we then save as our prep file. So Command-Shift-S, we call it the same as it was before, _prep. We hit save. Hmm? Hmm? So let's continue. We want to, we saved this, so we want to go back to After Effects. In After Effects, we want to start with a blank composition. So we click on the new composition icon. Ta-da! In here, we want to double check that we are using the correct composition. So HDTV 1080-25. Double checking 1920 by 1080, square pixels, 25 frames, everything's good. The length doesn't matter so much. In my case, 20 seconds, more than I need today. Then the background color, I usually keep black if I want to change it later on anyways. Then we hit OK. Next, we want to import our Photoshop file. We can easily do that by dragging and dropping it. So we take the prep file and drag and drop it onto the project panel. Then we wait for a second and we should get a pop-up like this. So far, so good. Yeah? It should look like this, pretty much like this. Maybe I will take a quick look. So, in here, we then have 3 different options, and we want to choose the last one, which is set to composition retain layer sizes. There. Everything is fine. Happens. Let's just continue. So we choose merge layer styles into footage. Then we hit OK. Then we should have our comp1, the composition named after our Photoshop file, and a folder named after our Photoshop file. Yes? We double-click on the composition that is named after our Photoshop file. When we double-click it, it should open up down here. So we now have our render queue, the comp1, and our mockup. In here, we want to select the top layer, which is our font, or the URL. We will right-click on it, and we will choose Create, Convert to Editable Text. In older versions of After Effects, so if you're still running on 2017, for instance, there, I think it's somewhere else. It's still under right-click, but I think it might be directly in the list and not in a sub-menu. Yeah. Then we should have a text layer here. For the Windows users, you might get an error message. Maybe even the Mac users might get an error message. But then we just say, oh, okay, apparently. The people that built the mockup used a different font, but it doesn't kill us. I think one of the closer ones would be something like Tahoma or Roboto or something. Anyways, we then want this text to be animated in, and just to refresh our memories of what we've done for the homework and last class, let's do it together real quick. We open up the options for the text layer, then we click on the Animate button. Then we choose opacity.
How can you zoom to export? Oh,
Yeah, rather use the zoom tool. So we added the opacity as an animator here. So far, so good? Shall I wait or shall I look? I'll come to you in a second. Just show me where my recording. Next, we want to change our opacity to 0. The range that is selected by default is the entire range, so our URL should have disappeared. Then we go to the range selector, to the advanced options, and we change the smoothness to 0. So range selector, advanced options, smoothness to 0. So far so good? Okay. Huh? Advanced, yes? Oh no. No. Range selector. And then advanced options, not path options. Sounds similar though. And then smoothness to 0.
I don't find that much.
That's fine too. So, now that we changed our smoothness, we can animate the start and the end. Although we only need to animate the start. So let's scroll upwards a little bit to our range selector 1 and go to the start option. Make sure that the slider is at the beginning of the timeline. Then you activate the stopwatch for the start. Now, because there are so many things open, I think it's a little bit irritating. Since we have a keyframe here, we can now hit the shortcut U, and it should only show this property and everything should look a lot more cleaner. Then we can go, let's say, 20 frames forward. Command Shift and the right arrow key twice moves us 20 frames forward. Here we can then change the start value from 0 to 100. And we should see how our text is writing itself in. So far, so good? Yes.
The opacity animation, it always works from right to left, or is it because of the smoothness that we changed?
No, it is because we're animating the start. Imagine it like this.